There is a group that calls on the West to diversify its population, to moderate its whiteness and lessen its level of Christianity. The claim is that diversity makes us stronger, without ever defining who this us is or what the strength is. But regardless, is not the complaint that the West is too strong? Have not these same people condemned the strength of the West, pointing to its colonization of other cultures' sandlands? Is the West not criticized for engaging in multiple wars in which the other nations and peoples are brought to their knees and forced to capitulate to the power of the West? The West has always been as strong as it is, in modern times, because modernity was created by the West. There is a good case to be made for saying modern civilization is a product of the West. But the point is, why do the enemies of the West want to make us stronger? Are we not strong enough? There have always been migrations and the movements of people. For most of the time the movement was towards unsettled areas, then the movement was into areas settled by less developed and primitive peoples. It was not just a matter of technical superiority. The less technologically advanced a people is, the sparser the settlements. People without technology require far more land than do the more advanced populations. So the West, as the more advanced area of the planet, tended to have the people to migrate into the more sparsely populated areas. No doubt many Westerners did not fully appreciate some lands were even populated so sparse were the tribal units. If one is a hunter-gatherer, one cannot occupy the land. Even for the tribe itself, it can only remain in one place for a limited length of time. The resources the tribe can use are limited and become harder to reap over time as the area around the camp become depleted. The tribe must then move far enough away that it creates a subsistence circle that it can reap from over the next period without encroaching upon the previous area. Not being sedentary, the tribe cannot exercise effective control over the entire extent of where it scavenges from. Therefore, tribes are in constant warfare as there is no clear demarcation of boundaries and need, and the constant search for better places to reap from keeps tribes constantly on the move. Indeed, if there are no tribes in the land south of them, the search for new grounds to cull from will tend to pull the tribe south. This explains migration patterns somewhat. It is far more beneficial to move into new lands than it is to return to land that had been previously gleaned. Colonists might therefore find land that is perfectly suited for agriculture left unpeopled because it had been exhausted of game previously. Natives might have been bemused at a people who would move into an area that had been stripped of much of its natural resources by the local tribe's people. A people dependent on technology learns to cooperate in a way different from people who depend on subsistence farming or a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. When one's timeline is short and one lives primarily, day to day, one must learn to cooperate primarily in the gathering and sharing of food resources. The successful hunter shares with trusted members of the tribe because this helps ensure that when he is unlucky in the hunt, others will share their catch with him and his family. This interdependence makes tribal persons seem generous, but they also have a tendency to see a surplus as community property. This is important to a tribal people because a member that wanted to accumulate wealth posed a danger to the tribe's security, which was considered a communal concern. The individual, in a tribe, exists for the good of all. As a hunter-gatherer economy, this communalization of risk is a good survival strategy. However, it is not a biblical path, and it harbors a disease as a recessive trait. Agoraphobia cannot manifest in an environment of scarcity. However, neither can agorocracy, the other side of agoraphobia, manifest in these environments of deprivation. The tribe is maintained on the edge of starvation without there being a path forward. This is why a place like Africa can remain in a state of underdevelopment for millennia, despite being surrounded by developing nations. There is a simple equation we can use to define development or the tendency to develop. The factors that are pertinent to this issue is the value of equity produced per capita minus consumption or the rate of surplus production. The closer the rate of consumption approaches the rate of equity production, the lower the production of capital or investing. The community has to invest, but if the community sees all surpluses as something to be shared and consumed, then investments will remain close to zero. This means production needs to be granular, not homogeneous. The more persons' production is shared with, the less likely a surplus, and the less likely sufficient wealth will be accumulated to enable investments to be made. The problem with diversity is that it multiplies the justification for consumerism. Homogenization does not help if the people are agoraphobic and consume everything produced, but a highly diverse group will not share the common identity necessary to affect development. In other words, if we are to accumulate wealth, we must repress the desire to consume what is produced, we have to delay gratification. But if there is no shared identity, the faith necessary to delay gratification will not be present. Despite what Christians believe, faith in God does not save us if we reject His people, because it is a contradiction. God works through His church. An extreme example would be a leader who persecutes the church yet claims he is a Christian. It would be akin to Paul continuing his persecution of Christians all while claiming he was one. This is why we are told to look at the beam in our own eye before condemning others, and why we are told to forgive our brother and not condemn them. The body of Christ represents God on earth. We are His bride, and we are inhabited by the Holy Spirit. If we lack faith in the church, what is our faith based on? This brings us back to the topic of this essay and poses a broader question. If we are diverse, then how deep is our faith? Variety is not the same as diversity, at least not in this context. We are all unique, but it not this which makes us diverse. Diversity is man-made, variety is God-breathed. Diversity comes from men having different gods, different cultures and values. Diversity is created to divide, that is its purpose. Diversity is the precursor to division. The big lie that has been told regarding diversity is that anyone against diversity is a racist or xenophobe. However, this does not equate to diversity being a good thing. Even if it was racist to oppose illegal migration, it does not make the illegal migration a good thing. We can be against the Bloods, as a gang, without being racists even though the members are black. What needs to be done is to stop equating diversity with variability. The fact that we are all different biologically does not make all cultures equitable. But of course, this whole thing was enabled by the mantra that all cultures are equally valid. The fact that you might live in a mud hut and have no written language or means of transport does not mean your way of life is less valid than the way of life that produced Western civilization. Another issue is that people look at the West as different cultures and claim these are different in the sense that early native tribe culture and the culture of the West are different. To reject the way Haitians live and not reject the culture of Germany, as an English person, is to be accused of hypocrisy. If the accusation is not true, then there would need to be a division between various cultures. That is, there would need to be a way to rate cultures in a way that could be substantiated scientifically. We understand there is a great diversity of cultures in this world, and individual cultures have changed over time. But the question is, are there good cultures and bad cultures? This is, in one sense, a silly question. We know there are good persons and bad ones. We know the culture of a banker is better than the culture of a street gang. If people can be good and bad and groups can be good and bad, why are cultures in the broader sense of the term exempt from this kind of evaluation? Imagine a culture that took 1/10 of all babies and sacrificed them to the gods. Would this be a good culture? Can we not imagine a culture that would not be a culture that ought to be allowed to exist? God told Israel several times to wipe out certain peoples and cultures. There are a lot of peoples we know little of because they were wiped out. Is a culture that does not have the means to persist a good culture? One would think extinction would indicate a failed culture. If we can agree to this, then what of cultures that exist, but contain in them the conditions of their own demise? It is pointless to even question if a culture that promotes abortion and childlessness ought to exist, because obviously they are slated for destruction. A people that cannot replace itself will vanish. The very idea that diversity is unimpeachably good is moronic. If everything is good just because it is different from what we got, enables everything to be justified, and the more one resists what is happening, the more it is justified by this policy. This policy which comes down to the appeasement of all that is criminal and evil. Pedophilia is diversity when compared to its opposite. Gangs are diverse compared to working men and women. Cannibalism is diverse compared to the diet of ordinary persons. Being different is not unequivocally a good thing. Indeed, we can say that evil is more diverse than good, because there are more ways to be bad than there is to be good. Indeed, if we wish to get technical, doing the right thing is highly constraining because to do good in the highest sense, is to be perfect. But it is very easy to be less than perfect, and the further away from perfection one gets, the easier it is for the evildoer. The idea that diversity in its broadest sense, is our strength, is as bizarre as it is wrong. An enemy adds diversity to a nation while systematically attempting to destroy all of the defender's strong points and points of resistance. Diversity only helps within a restricted range. This world decries colonialism because its detractors say the things that colonists bring into the nation are not compatible with the local culture. Diversity, in the sense of cultural and political divisions, bring war. Homogeneous people do not conflict, there must be something to fight over, therefore there must be a division to have differences. It is the significance of the division that determines whether there is some attraction or a war. There needs to be differences, but that does not mean all differences are good. The West was at its height of power when it was at its most homogeneous. On the other hand, some of the worst periods was when Protestantism split from Catholicism and when Islam attempted to overcome the Europe. It can be pretty much guaranteed that no one was singing, "Diversity is our strength," during the siege of Vienna. One of the problems we have is people who take a factor and turn it into a moral good. Specialization is beneficial, but it is not just the fact that two people have different ways of earning a living, it is that they have two ways of contributing to a common end. If a group is building a barn, diversity is beneficial so long as everyone is contributing something to raising the barn. It probably is not a good time for a quilter to show up and try and get everyone interested in quilting. This does not make quilters bad, it simply means they are irrelevant to the point of being a distraction from the objective of the group. Diversity only matters as a secondary quality. Diversity, in the context of philosophy, is not a first-order principle. It is not a good in itself. Diversity is only good, if it is beneficial at all, in context. Diversity is the same as promiscuous. If it is not good to sleep with hundreds of different sexual partners, diversity is not an unmitigated good. Just as promiscuity destroys the legitimacy of a marriage, diversity in a community destroys the character and therefore, the legitimacy of a community. If we went to a native community to witness native skills and traditions and were met with Japanese geishas playing and singing traditional Japanese songs, we would be upset. Some might want to argue that Europe is diverse, but it is diverse in a sense different from the diversity of Islam and Christianity. Even atheist Europeans still share more cultural norms than a devout Muslim shares with an European atheist or Christian. There is a common and shared history amongst Europeans that those from the East do not understand. This is not an issue of good and bad or right and wrong. But if the cultures of the Middle East or Far East are valid, then the cultures of the West are not legitimate. The law cannot be both Sharia and Western. The law has to pick one side or the other when there are incompatible differences. Are we permitted to mock religions, or only Christianity? Are we permitted to be openly gay, or is it met with capital punishment? Diversity can only extend so far until it meets incompatibility. When diversity begins to include elements that are not compatible, there is the threat of delegitimizing one or the other elements included in the mix. It cannot be otherwise. When we call for diversity, it is good to remember if one is calling for the overthrow of a set of values, because if the diversity one wishes for is antithetical to the values and traditions one has, eventually there will be a reckoning. There must be. One cannot have democracy in a totalitarian dictatorship, nor a patriarchy in a liberal society. Sometimes, one just has to make a choice what your priorities are and sacrifice diversity for the legitimacy of your priorities. When things are so divided that we can assert that diversity exists, we have exceeded the level of variety that is considered variability. Variation is good and beneficial. There is variation amongst all things. But when this variation turns into diversity, it has got to the point where incongruities emerge, and even if the totality of all things is strengthened, the local community or population is not strengthened in any immediate or direct way. Capitalism is not strengthened by communism. The nation is not strengthened by an invasion. A woman's club is not strengthened by admitting men, nor are men's sports strengthened by admitting women. The claim, diversity is our strength, is far too general to be meaningful and prone to too many counter-narratives to be trusted.